The evening sky over New Haven glowed with soft orange and purple hues as the sun set behind the distant mountains. The colony's central square buzzed with excitement as families gathered for the annual harvest festival. Children ran between market stalls while their parents sampled fresh produce and homemade goods. Music drifted through the warm air, mixing with laughter and cheerful conversations. Commander Jake Morrison stood near the main stage, watching his nephew Tommy chase after other kids in an impromptu game of tag. His sister Lisa smiled beside him, her hand resting on his arm. She looked happy and peaceful, exactly what Jake had hoped to see when he requested leave to visit her. Life in the Earth fleet kept him away too often, but moments like these reminded him why he fought to protect humanity's expansion into the stars. Tommy ran up to them, breathless and grinning. The 8-year-old boy tugged on Jake's uniform sleeve. His mother laughed and ruffled his hair, telling him to catch his breath before running off again. The boy beamed at both of them before racing back to his friends. Lisa turned to her brother and thanked him for coming all this way. She knew his duties kept him busy, but having him here meant everything to her and Tommy. Jake was about to respond when the first explosion rocked the square. The blast wave knocked people off their feet. Screaming replaced laughter in an instant. Jake grabbed Lisa and pulled her behind a vendor stall as debris rained down around them. His military training kicked in immediately. His eyes scanned the sky, searching for the threat. 3 massive ships hung in the atmosphere above the colony. Their hulls were dark and covered in angular armor plates that reflected no light. Jake had never seen vessels like these before. They were not human designs, and they were not from any of the peaceful alien species humanity had encountered. Warning sirens began wailing across the settlement as more explosions erupted in the distance. Lisa screamed Tommy's name and tried to run back into the square. Jake held her back, his grip firm but gentle. He told her they needed to find cover first, then they would get Tommy. She fought against him for a moment before nodding, tears streaming down her face. The square had become chaos. People ran in every direction, not knowing where safety could be found. Dr. Henry Walsh appeared from behind a collapsed booth, his medical bag still clutched in his hand. Blood covered his shirt, though Jake could not tell if it was his own or from someone he had tried to help. The doctor's eyes were wide with shock, but his voice remained steady. He asked Jake what they should do. The commander quickly assessed their situation. They needed to reach the emergency shelters on the colony's outskirts. Another barrage of energy weapons struck the city center. Buildings exploded into flames and rubble. Jake could see the alien ships firing with cold precision, targeting infrastructure and populated areas. This was not a warning shot or an attempt at communication. This was extermination. The realization hit him like a physical blow. These aliens wanted them dead, pure and simple. He spotted Tommy huddled beneath an overturned table with 2 other children. Jake ran toward them, keeping low as debris continued falling. He reached the kids and pulled them out, checking each one for injuries. Tommy threw his arms around his uncle's neck, sobbing. Jake held him tight for just a moment before passing him to Lisa, who had followed close behind. He told her to take the children and run toward the eastern shelters with Dr. Walsh. Lisa refused to leave without him. Jake grabbed her shoulders and looked directly into her eyes. He told her that Tommy needed her alive, that she had to protect their nephew. He promised he would find them at the shelters. She knew he was lying about following them, knew he planned to stay and help others evacuate, but she also knew there was no time to argue. She kissed his cheek, whispered that she loved him, and ran with Tommy clutched against her chest. Jake watched them disappear into the smoke before turning back to the devastation. People were trapped under collapsed structures. Others wandered in shock, bleeding and disoriented. He began organizing survivors, directing them toward the shelters while pulling injured colonists from rubble. Other able-bodied citizens joined him, forming rescue teams that worked desperately against time. The alien ships repositioned overhead. Jake recognized the charging signature of their main weapons. He had seconds, not minutes. He screamed for everyone to run. The beam struck the central square directly, vaporizing everything within 200 meters. The shockwave threw Jake through the air. He crashed through a storefront window and landed hard on broken glass. His ears rang and blood ran down his face. He pushed himself up and stumbled back outside. Where the square had stood, there was now only a smoking crater. Hundreds of people had been there moments ago. Now they were simply gone. Jake felt something break inside him, but he forced himself to keep moving. Others still needed help. For 3 hours, the bombardment continued. Jake coordinated evacuation efforts over failing communication systems. Small groups of survivors made it to the emergency shuttles and escape pods hidden throughout the colony. He watched ships launch into the sky, praying each one would make it past the alien blockade. Some did. Others were shot down before they cleared the atmosphere. Finally, only a handful of people remained near the landing pads. Jake herded them toward the last functional shuttle. Dr. Walsh was there, covered in dust and exhaustion. He reported that Lisa had made it to the eastern shelter, but it had taken a direct hit 20 minutes ago. Nobody survived. Jake felt the words but could not process them. His mind refused to accept what they meant. Tommy appeared from behind the shuttle, his face pale and streaked with tears. A young teacher named Miss Carroll had pulled him from the shelter just before it collapsed. She had given her life getting him out. Jake knelt and pulled his nephew into a fierce embrace. The boy whispered that his mother was gone. Jake's vision blurred with tears, but he nodded and told Tommy he was safe now. They boarded the shuttle with the last survivors. As the craft lifted off, Jake looked down at New Haven. Fires burned across the entire settlement. The alien ships had finished their work and were beginning to leave orbit. They transmitted a message that played across all frequencies. The voice was cold and mechanical, translated by basic language protocols. It declared that New Haven now belonged to the Krovar Empire. Human claims to this world were dismissed as irrelevant. Resistance would result in complete eradication. Jake recorded everything he saw. Every moment of destruction, every civilian death, every war crime these aliens committed. He uploaded the footage to Earth Fleet Command with a priority signal. His message was simple and direct. New Haven had fallen. 47,000 colonists were dead. First contact with the Krovar Empire had ended in massacre, and humanity needed to respond. Admiral Patricia Cole stood in the operations center at Earth Fleet headquarters in Geneva, watching the footage from New Haven for the 5th time. Her jaw clenched tighter with each viewing. Behind her, dozens of officers worked at their stations, their faces reflecting the same mixture of shock and rage that burned in her chest. The massacre had happened 4 days ago, and the images still felt unreal. President Daniel Cross entered the room flanked by General Frank Murphy and his security detail. Every person in the operations center stood at attention. The president waved them back to their stations and approached the main display screen. He asked Admiral Cole to show him everything. She nodded and started the recording from the beginning. They watched in silence as the Harvest Festival turned into a slaughter. Children running for their lives, buildings collapsing into rubble, escape pods being shot down as they fled the planet. The cold, mechanical voice of the Krovar claiming New Haven as their territory. When the footage ended, President Cross stood motionless for a long moment. His face had gone pale, but his eyes burned with determination. General Murphy broke the silence. He reported that intelligence had confirmed the Krovar Empire controlled 17 conquered star systems. They were a militaristic species with a history of aggressive expansion. Every civilization they encountered either submitted or was destroyed. The Krovar viewed compassion as weakness and negotiation as an insult. They respected only strength and had apparently decided humanity looked like easy prey. President Cross asked how many survivors escaped New Haven. Admiral Cole replied that 3,000 made it off the planet. Most were injured or traumatized. Commander Jake Morrison was among them, currently on a medical transport heading toward Earth with his nephew. The boy had lost his mother in the attack. The president absorbed this information with a slight nod. 3,000 survivors from a colony of 50,000. The numbers were staggering. The president requested a meeting with the full Security Council within the hour. He wanted military options prepared and diplomatic channels explored, though his tone suggested little faith in diplomacy. Admiral Cole assured him that her staff had already begun preliminary planning. General Murphy added that the Marine Corps stood ready to deploy at presidential order. Cross thanked them both and left to prepare his address. The Security Council meeting lasted 6 hours. Representatives from every Earth region attended, along with colonial governors joining via secure transmission. Some argued for restraint and diplomatic outreach. Others demanded immediate military retaliation. President Cross listened to every opinion without interruption. When the last speaker finished, he stood and addressed the room. He spoke of humanity's journey into the stars. They had left Earth seeking new opportunities and new friendships among the galactic community. They had approached every new species with open hands and peaceful intentions. They had traded knowledge, shared resources, and built bridges across the darkness of space. But they had also learned from Earth's own bloody history. They knew that peace required strength, that goodwill alone could not stop those who chose violence. New Haven was not the first human settlement beyond Earth, and it would not be the last. Every man, woman, and child who called the stars their home did so under Earth's protection. That protection was not symbolic. It was absolute. The Crovar had murdered 47,000 humans without warning, without cause, without mercy. They had done so believing humanity would accept this atrocity, that Earth would bow before their threats. President Cross paused and looked around the room. His next words came out calm but filled with steel. The Crovar Empire had made a fundamental miscalculation. They would learn that humanity valued every single life. They would discover that an attack on any human was an attack on all humans, and they would understand that Earth's response to genocide was not negotiation, it was justice. He authorized Operation Hammerfall with full military deployment. The vote passed with overwhelming majority. Only 3 council members abstained and none voted against. Earth was going to war. Admiral Cole immediately began mobilizing the fleet. Orders went out to every naval base and shipyard across human space. Vessels that had been on patrol were recalled. Ships in dry dock were rushed back into service. Crews on leave were summoned back to their posts. The largest military armada in human history began assembling at staging points throughout the solar system. Dr. Sophie Kim arrived at fleet headquarters 3 days into the mobilization. She headed Earth's Advanced Weapons Division, a secretive research branch that most civilians did not know existed. She brought with her specifications for weapons systems that had been tested, but never deployed in combat. Railguns that could fire projectiles at near light speed, plasma weapons that burned hotter than stars, automated drone swarms controlled by advanced artificial intelligence. General Murphy reviewed the specifications with growing satisfaction. These were not the weapons of explorers or merchants. These were tools designed for war. Commander Jake Morrison arrived on Earth while the fleet continued gathering. He looked older than his 34 years, his face marked by exhaustion and grief. Tommy clung to his hand as they walked through the headquarters. Admiral Cole met them personally and expressed her condolences. She also informed Jake that he was being promoted to captain and given command of the ESS Thunder, a heavy destroyer fresh from the construction yards. Jake accepted without hesitation. He asked only that Tommy be placed with a trusted family while he was deployed. The admiral had already arranged for a retired naval officer and his wife to foster the boy. They had raised 3 children of their own and understood the life of a military family. Jake knelt and told Tommy he had to go away for a while but would come back. The boy nodded, trying to be brave even as tears rolled down his face. Captain Nina Scott received her own classified orders. She was one of Earth's best intelligence officers, specializing in deep cover operations. Her mission was to infiltrate Crovar space and gather tactical information about their military capabilities and strategic positions. She would be inserted via stealth ship into a border system, where she would pose as a refugee from a conquered species. The assignment was dangerous, possibly suicidal. She accepted it without question. Over the following 2 weeks, the fleet reached full readiness. 500 warships assembled in formation beyond Mars orbit. Capital ships formed the core, massive dreadnoughts and carriers that dwarfed anything humanity had built before the New Haven massacre. Around them flew cruisers, destroyers, frigates, and support vessels. Fighter squadrons conducted drills between the larger ships. Marines practiced boarding actions in zero gravity. Every system was tested and retested. President Cross made a final address to Earth before the fleet's departure. He spoke from the White House lawn with the night sky visible behind him. He told humanity that their sons and daughters were going into danger, that some would not return. But they went knowing their cause was just. They went to ensure that no other family would suffer what New Haven's families suffered. They went to prove that humanity would defend its own no matter the cost. The speech was broadcast across every human settlement. On Earth, people gathered in public squares to watch. In orbital stations, workers stopped their tasks to listen. On distant colonies, families held each other tight and prayed for the fleet. When the president finished speaking, A moment of silence fell across human space. Then one by one lights began appearing. Candles, flashlights, torches. Millions of small flames lighting up the darkness in memory of New Haven's dead. Admiral Cole stood on the bridge of her flagship, the ESS Vengeance, and watched Earth grow smaller on the view screen. Around her, the massive fleet began accelerating toward jump coordinates. Captain Jake Morrison commanded his destroyer in the formation's third wave. Captain Nina Scott had already disappeared into Krovar territory on her lonely mission. General Murphy prepared his Marines for the ground combat that would surely come. The Admiral opened a fleet-wide channel and delivered her final orders before they jumped. They were the sword of Earth. They carried the memory of 47,000 innocent dead. They would bring justice to the Krovar Empire, not through cruelty or revenge, but through overwhelming force applied with precision. They would show the galaxy that humanity could be gentle with friends and terrible to enemies. The fleet jumped into faster-than-light travel. Behind them, Earth continued turning. Ahead of them, the Krovar Empire waited, unaware that they had awakened something fierce and unyielding in humanity's heart. General Throck reviewed the intelligence reports in his command center on the Krovar homeworld with growing amusement. The reports claimed that a massive human fleet was approaching Krovar space. His subordinates looked nervous, but Throck dismissed their concerns with a wave of his clawed hand. Humans were weak creatures who built colonies instead of armies. They traded goods instead of conquering territory. The destruction of their pathetic settlement called New Haven proved how easily they died. His tactical officer suggested recalling some frontier fleets as a precaution. Throck denied the request. The Krovar Empire had crushed 17 species over the past 2 centuries. Not one of them had mounted effective resistance. Humans would be no different. In fact, he was already planning attacks on 3 more human colonies. These prey species needed to learn their place in the galaxy, and the Krovar would teach them through fire and blood. The first attack came without warning. A Krovar military outpost in the Kellor system simply stopped transmitting. Throck assumed equipment failure until 3 more bases in different systems went silent within the same hour. He ordered investigation teams sent immediately. None of them arrived in time to matter. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the ESS Thunder as his crew confirmed the destruction of their 4th target. The Krovar military base had been protected by defensive platforms and a small patrol fleet. None of it helped. Human railguns fired projectiles that crossed the distance at speeds the Krovar shields could not handle. By the time their sensors detected the incoming fire, the rounds had already struck. The base broke apart in spectacular explosions, its atmosphere venting into space. Jake felt nothing watching the destruction. He had cried for his sister. He had held his nephew through nightmares about the massacre. Now there was only cold purpose. Each Krovar base they eliminated was one less threat to human colonies. His tactical officer reported all targets destroyed and no human casualties. Jake nodded and ordered them to jump to the next coordinates. They had a long list to work through. Admiral Cole coordinated the assault from her flagship. She had divided the fleet into strike groups, each targeting specific Krovar military installations. The strategy was methodical and brutal. They were not trying to capture territory or force surrender. They were systematically dismantling the Krovar Empire's ability to wage war. Shipyards burned, supply depots exploded, command centers went dark, and through it all, human forces suffered minimal casualties. The Krovar military doctrine relied on heavy armor and overwhelming numbers. Their ships were tough and could take tremendous damage. But they were also slow and predictable. Human vessels danced around them, using superior speed and maneuverability. When the Krovar did land hits, human shields absorbed most of the damage. The few times Krovar boarding parties attempted to take human ships, they were met by automated defense systems that cut them down before they advanced 10 meters. Lieutenant Peter Chen led his fighter squadron in support of a cruiser assault on a Krovar depot. His orders were to eliminate defensive platforms while the larger ships handled the station itself. Chen was 26 years old and had been flying combat simulations since joining the fleet 5 years ago. This was his first real battle, and the reality of it differed from the simulations in ways that made his heart race. The Krovar launched interceptors to meet his squadron. Chen counted 30 enemy fighters against his 12. The numbers should have favored the Krovar, but human fighter craft operated on different principles. Each one carried an artificial intelligence co-pilot that handled defensive systems and threat analysis. The human pilot focused purely on offense. The combination proved devastating. Chen's targeting computer painted enemy fighters with red markers. His AI identified optimal firing solutions faster than any organic being could process. He squeezed the trigger and watched plasma bolts tear through an enemy interceptor. It exploded in a brief flash of light. Around him, his squadron mates engaged their own targets with similar results. Within 3 minutes, all 30 Krovar fighters were debris. Chen's squadron had lost 0 craft. The cruisers finished destroying the depot while Chen's squadron flew cover. As they prepared to jump to the next system, his communications officer reported that command had a message for all pilots. Admiral Cole wanted them to know they were making humanity proud. Chen felt a surge of emotion at those words. They were not just fighting for revenge. They were ensuring this never happened to anyone else. Captain Nina Scott moved through the crowded marketplace on a Krovar border world, her face hidden beneath a hood. She had been operating behind enemy lines for 2 weeks now, posing as a merchant from a conquered species. Her disguise held up under casual inspection, and she had picked up enough of the local language to avoid suspicion. What she discovered in that time made her blood run cold. The Krovar kept detailed records of their conquests. Nina accessed their public archives and found documentation of 23 genocides. The number was higher than Earth intelligence had estimated. Each conquered species was either enslaved or exterminated based on their perceived usefulness. The archives included images and videos of the atrocities, preserved as warnings to other species. She also learned about the Krovar military hierarchy. General Throck commanded the frontier forces and had personally ordered the attack on New Haven. His headquarters was on a fortress world called Kravik Prime, protected by multiple defense fleets and ground forces. Nina transmitted all of this information back to Earth Fleet through encrypted channels. She included the coordinates for Kravik Prime and a detailed analysis of its defenses. The Krovar High Command finally began taking the human threat seriously after losing 12 military installations in 6 days. They attempted to contact Earth for negotiations. Admiral Cole refused all communications. President Cross made a brief public statement explaining that humanity did not negotiate with genocidal empires. The Krovar could surrender unconditionally or face complete military defeat. There would be no middle ground. General Throck watched his empire crumble on tactical displays. Red markers showed destroyed bases. Yellow markers indicated facilities under attack. Green markers for secure positions were disappearing faster than he could track. His subordinates now openly questioned his earlier dismissal of the human threat. Some suggested offering reparations for New Haven. Others recommended withdrawing to fortified core worlds. Throck refused both options. The Krovar had never retreated from prey species, and they would not start now. He ordered all remaining frontier fleets to consolidate at Kravik Prime. Let the humans come. He would crush them there and prove that Krovar's strength remained supreme. His tactical staff implemented the orders despite their obvious doubts. Sergeant Roy Baker prepared his Marine squad for their first ground assault. They were aboard a troop carrier that would drop them onto a Krovar-held moon, where intelligence suggested prisoners from conquered species were being held. The mission was secondary to the main fleet operations. But Admiral Cole had made it clear that Earth would not abandon victims of Krovar cruelty. Baker was 32 years old and had served in the Marines for 14 years. He had trained for combat his entire career but never deployed in actual warfare. Now he checked his squad's equipment with practiced efficiency, ensuring every weapon functioned and every armor seal held tight. His troops were young and nervous. He told them to focus on their training and trust each other. Everything else would follow. The drop went smoothly until they hit atmosphere. Krovar defense systems opened fire, filling the sky with flak. 3 dropships were hit and spiraled down in flames. Baker's craft shook violently but held together. They crashed hard into the moon's surface, the impact jarring but survivable. The rear ramp dropped and Baker led his squad into the unknown. Krovar guards met them with plasma fire. Baker's shield took 2 hits before he returned fire with his rifle. The weapon used electromagnetic acceleration to fire armor-piercing rounds. His first burst caught a Krovar in the chest, punching through its protective gear. The alien went down hard. Around him, his squad engaged in fierce combat. They fought room by room through the detention facility. Baker's training took over, his movements efficient and deadly. The Krovar were tough opponents, but human weapons and tactics proved superior. After 40 minutes of brutal combat, they secured the facility. Baker found 300 prisoners from 4 different species locked in terrible conditions. His medical team immediately began treatment while evacuation craft descended from orbit. One of the prisoners was a young female from a species called the Venari. She spoke broken English and asked Baker if the humans had come to conquer them too. He knelt and told her that humans had come to free them. Earth did not build empires through conquest. The Venari looked at him with large eyes that reflected hope for the first time in years. Captain Jake Morrison received new orders while his ship refueled at a mobile supply station. Admiral Cole was reassigning strike groups for a major offensive. Intelligence from Captain Scott had located General Throck's headquarters. The fleet was going to Kravik Prime. Jake checked the tactical data and felt his pulse quicken. This was not just another raid. Kravik Prime hung in space like a gray fortress, its surface covered with military installations and defensive platforms. The planet had never fallen to enemy forces in 500 years of Krovar history. General Throck watched from his underground command center as sensor arrays detected the approaching human fleet. 200 warships emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. The display screens showed so many vessels that they blotted out the stars. Throck's tactical staff worked frantically at their stations. They counted capital ships, analyzed weapon signatures, and calculated defensive responses. Every analysis came back unfavorable. The humans had brought overwhelming force, but Throck refused to show fear. He ordered all orbital platforms to combat readiness and scrambled every fighter squadron. Kravik Prime would not surrender. It would prove that Krovar's strength could not be broken. Admiral Cole stood on the bridge of the ESS Vengeance and studied the tactical display. Kravik Prime's defenses were impressive. Dozens of weapons platforms ringed the planet in overlapping fields of fire. 3 defense fleets patrolled the orbital space with over 100 warships. Ground-based missile systems covered approach vectors. This would not be an easy victory. She opened a direct transmission to the planet's surface. Her message broadcast on all frequencies in multiple languages. She identified herself and stated Earth's demands clearly. General Throck and all officers involved in the New Haven massacre must surrender immediately to face trial for war crimes. They had 6 hours to comply. If they refused, Earth fleet would take them by force. The transmission ended with no room for negotiation. General Throck watched the human admiral deliver her ultimatum. His subordinates looked at him nervously, waiting for his response. Several of them suggested opening negotiations. The humans clearly had superior military power. Perhaps they could arrange terms that preserved some Krovar honor. Throck silenced them with a roar that echoed through the command center. He would not bow to prey species. The Krovar had conquered 17 civilizations. They had never surrendered. They never would. Any officer who suggested otherwise would be executed for cowardice. Throck ordered his tactical staff to prepare for orbital combat. He also commanded his personal guard to secure the underground fortress. Let the humans come. They would break themselves against Krovar defenses. The 6 hours passed in tense silence. Human ships maintained position in a loose blockade formation. Krovar defenders watched and waited, expecting orbital bombardment at any moment. When the deadline expired, nothing happened. No missiles launched. No energy weapons fired. Instead, something else appeared on the sensors. Thousands of heat signatures lit up in high orbit. Drop pods and assault shuttles began descending toward the planet's surface. Admiral Cole had not ordered bombardment. She was sending in ground forces. The realization spread through Krovar Command like wildfire. The humans were not going to destroy the planet. They were coming to take it. Sergeant Roy Baker felt his stomach drop as his assault pod hit atmosphere. Around him, his squad gripped their harnesses tight. The pod shook violently, its heat shields glowing red-hot from friction. Outside, Krovar anti-aircraft fire filled the sky. Baker watched through external cameras as 3 pods exploded before reaching the ground. Each one carried 12 Marines. 36 lives gone in seconds. His pod slammed into the surface near a military compound. The impact jarred every bone in his body. The harness released and the doors blew open. Baker led his squad out into chaos. Krovar soldiers opened fire from defensive positions. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air. One of Baker's troops took a hit to the shoulder and went down. The medic dragged him behind cover while the rest of the squad returned fire. The battle for Kravik Prime began in earnest. 10,000 Earth Marines hit the ground across multiple landing zones. They did not target civilian areas. Their objectives were specific military installations, supply depots, and command centers. The fighting was brutal in close quarters. Krovar soldiers were fierce warriors who gave ground reluctantly, but human soldiers fought with disciplined fury that slowly pushed the defenders back. Lieutenant Peter Chen's fighter squadron provided air support for advancing ground forces. His orders were to eliminate any Krovar aircraft or ground vehicles that threatened Marine positions. Chen flew low over a battlefield where human and Krovar troops fought street by street through an industrial district. His targeting computer identified Krovar armored vehicles moving to flank a Marine position. Chen lined up his attack run and released missiles. The projectiles streaked downward and impacted with devastating accuracy. 2 armored vehicles exploded. A third tried to retreat but took plasma fire from Chen's wingman. The Marine commander on the ground transmitted thanks. Chen acknowledged and pulled up to gain altitude for another pass. The aerial combat was intense. Krovar pilots were skilled and their aircraft durable, but human fighters had technological advantages that proved decisive. Better sensors, faster reaction times, smarter weapons. Chen's squadron shot down 15 enemy craft while losing only 2 of their own. Each loss hurt. Each fallen pilot had been a friend and comrade, but they pressed on because stopping meant letting their ground forces down. Captain Nina Scott emerged from hiding on the 3rd day of fighting. She had stayed under cover until the battle began, gathering last-minute intelligence about Throck's fortress location. Now she made contact with a Marine strike team led by Captain Jake Morrison. His unit had been tasked with capturing the Krovar general, and Nina's intel was critical to their success. Jake recognized her immediately from pre-mission briefings. She looked exhausted, her disguise tattered and dirty, but her eyes were sharp and focused. She showed him detailed maps of the underground fortress, including guard positions and security systems. The fortress had been designed to withstand orbital bombardment, with walls meters thick and multiple redundant power systems. Taking it would require precision and courage. Jake assembled his strike team of 30 Marines. He briefed them on the mission parameters. They would infiltrate through a maintenance tunnel that Nina had identified. Once inside, they would fight their way to the command center and capture Throck alive. Earth wanted him to stand trial, not die in battle. The Marines checked their equipment one last time and moved out. The tunnel was narrow and dark. Jake led the way with Nina close behind. They moved silently through the underground passages, following her guidance. Twice they encountered Krovar guards. Twice they eliminated the threats without raising alarms. The fortress's security focused outward on the surface battle. They did not expect enemies to already be inside their walls. They emerged in a lower-level storage area. Alarms immediately began wailing. Their element of surprise was gone. Jake ordered his team into defensive positions as Krovar soldiers rushed toward them. The firefight in the confined space was deafening. Plasma bolts ricocheted off metal walls. Human rifles chattered in controlled bursts. Bodies fell on both sides. Jake's team fought forward meter by meter. They cleared rooms methodically, leaving no enemies behind them. The Krovar fought with desperate ferocity, knowing their general's life depended on stopping the humans. But Marine training and superior equipment slowly tilted the balance. After 40 minutes of brutal combat, Jake's team reached the command center doors. They breached with explosives that blew the heavy doors off their hinges. Jake was first through, his rifle raised. General Throck stood in the center of the room, surrounded by his personal guard. The Krovar general was massive, easily twice Jake's size. His armor was ceremonial and covered with markings of rank and honor. He roared a challenge and raised his weapon. The firefight was brief but intense. Throck's guards fought with suicidal courage. Jake's team cut them down while taking casualties of their own. 3 Marines fell before the last guard dropped. Then it was just Throck facing a dozen human rifles. The general could have surrendered. Instead, he charged. Jake shot him in the leg. The heavy round shattered bone and dropped Throck to one knee. The general tried to raise his weapon again. Jake put another round through his shoulder. Throck collapsed, roaring in pain and fury. Marines quickly moved in to restrain him with specialized bindings designed to hold a Krovar's strength. Jake stood over the fallen general and felt no satisfaction. This creature had ordered his sister's death, had killed 47,000 innocent people, had committed genocide against 23 species. Looking at him now, Jake saw not a mighty warrior but a brutal murderer. He told Throck in simple words that the general was under arrest for war crimes. He would face trial for his actions. Throck spat something in his native language. Nina translated. The general said humans were weak. That mercy was a disease, that the Crovar would never submit to prey species. Jake looked at him coldly and replied that mercy was not weakness. It was strength under control, something the Crovar would never understand. They dragged Throck from his fortress and brought him to the surface. The battle for Kravik Prime was winding down. Crovar defenders were surrendering in increasing numbers. Human casualties had been significant but far lower than expected. Admiral Cole's strategy of precision over destruction had worked. They had taken the fortress world. The Crovar fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in a desperate formation around Kravik Prime. Over 300 warships appeared on sensors, representing every remaining combat vessel in the Empire. They had come to rescue General Throck and salvage what remained of Crovar pride. Admiral Cole watched the tactical display and felt a moment of genuine surprise. She had expected the Crovar to cut their losses. Instead, they were committing everything to one final battle. Commander Ashley Brooks worked her tactical station aboard the ESS Vengeance with focused intensity. She had been coordinating fleet movements for 3 weeks straight, barely sleeping as they dismantled Crovar military power piece by piece. Now she analyzed the enemy formation and identified their strategy. The Crovar were attempting to create a corridor through human lines to reach the transport carrying Throck. It was bold, desperate, and tactically sound. Admiral Cole opened fleet-wide communications. Her voice remained calm despite the magnitude of what was coming. She reminded every captain and crew member why they were here. 47,000 innocent people had been murdered at New Haven. 23 other species had been exterminated by Crovar aggression. This battle would end that legacy of violence forever. She ordered all ships to defensive positions and gave permission to engage at will. The Crovar attacked in waves. Their capital ships formed the spearhead, massive dreadnoughts with armor thick enough to shrug off initial human fire. Behind them came cruisers and destroyers in tight formation. Fighter squadrons swarmed ahead, attempting to overwhelm human point defenses. It was the largest concentration of Crovar military power ever assembled, and they threw it forward with the fury of a dying. Empire Captain Jake Morrison commanded the ESS Thunder from a position directly, protecting the transport ship holding General Throck. They made 5 Crovar cruisers and broke through the outer defensive line and accelerated toward him. Jake's crew responded with practiced efficiency. Their railguns fired in synchronized volleys. Projectiles traveling at near light speed crossed the distance in seconds. The first cruiser took 3 hits to its forward section and exploded. The second cruiser's shields collapsed under sustained fire, but the remaining 3 pressed their attack. Plasma weapons heated Jake's shields to critical levels. His ship shook from multiple impacts. Damage reports flooded in. Port weapons were offline. Hull breaches on decks 4 and 7. Casualties in engineering. Jake ignored the chaos and focused on keeping the enemy away from the transport. His helmsman executed evasive maneuvers while maintaining position between the Crovar ships and their target. Lieutenant Peter Chen led his fighter squadron through a swarm of enemy interceptors. The battle had become a chaotic furball with craft from both sides mixing in deadly close combat. Chen's AI co-pilot tracked 17 threats simultaneously, while his hands flew across the controls. He squeezed off a burst that shredded an enemy fighter, rolled to avoid return fire, locked onto another target and fired again. His wingmen took a plasma bolt to the engine and spiraled out of control. Chen watched helplessly as the fighter exploded. That was another friend gone, another empty bunk in the squadron quarters. The rage that had been building since New Haven finally broke free. Chen dove back into the fight with renewed aggression, his plasma cannons tearing through enemy craft with methodical precision. The ESS Vengeance served as the fleet's anchor point. Commander Brooks coordinated defensive positions while managing her own ship's weapons. 3 Crovar dreadnoughts were focusing fire on the flagship, attempting to cut off the human command structure. The Vengeance's shields held but were weakening. Admiral Cole remained on the bridge, refusing to retreat to a safer vessel. Her crew fought with desperate determination to protect their admiral and their flagship. A Crovar torpedo broke through the point defenses and slammed into the Vengeance's starboard side. The explosion tore through 3 decks and vented atmosphere into space. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically, but 50 crew members were lost in an instant. Brooks felt the ship shudder beneath her feet. She glanced at damage control reports and knew they were in serious trouble. But she kept working, redirecting power from non-essential systems to weapons and shields. Sergeant Roy Baker fought on the surface of Kravik Prime as the space battle raged overhead. Krovar ground forces had launched a counterattack, attempting to retake the transport pad where Throck was being held. Baker's squad held a defensive position at the pad's entrance. Krovar soldiers charged their lines in waves, accepting massive casualties to reach their captured general. Baker's rifle grew hot from continuous firing. Empty magazines piled at his feet. His armor showed multiple impact marks from near misses. Around him, Marines fought with grim determination. They had come too far and lost too many friends to fail now. When his rifle's power cell depleted, Baker drew his sidearm and kept firing. A Krovar soldier broke through their line and rushed toward him. Baker met the charge with his combat knife, the two warriors grappling in brutal close combat before Baker drove the blade home. The space battle raged for 8 hours. Human ships maintained their defensive formation despite heavy casualties. The Krovar threw everything they had against the blockade, but human technology and tactics proved superior. One by one, Krovar capital ships were disabled or destroyed. Their fighter squadrons were decimated. The corridor they tried to create never materialized. Captain Jake Morrison's ship took catastrophic damage in the 4th hour. A Krovar dreadnought that should have been focusing on larger targets instead targeted the Thunder with its main weapons. Jake's shields failed. The first beam punched through his forward hull. The second hit the reactor room. Containment held, but barely. Jake ordered non-essential crew to abandon ship while he and a skeleton crew kept fighting. Lieutenant Chen saw the Thunder taking critical damage. He redirected his squadron to provide cover. They dove in and engaged the Krovar dreadnought with everything they had. Chen's fighter took hits. His shields collapsed. A plasma bolt struck his engine assembly. Alarm screamed as his craft lost power and began tumbling. His last coherent thought before ejecting was that he had bought the Thunder a few more seconds. Commander Brooks watched her tactical display as the battle began turning decisively in humanity's favor. The Krovar fleet was breaking apart. Ships were fleeing or surrendering. The gamble to rescue their general had failed completely. She reported to Admiral Cole that enemy resistance was collapsing. The Admiral nodded and gave the order to accept surrenders but continue destroying any ship that refused to stand down. The final Krovar ship stopped fighting 3 hours later. Admiral Cole surveyed the battlefield through her view screen. Debris from hundreds of vessels drifted in orbit. Escape pods dotted the space between larger wreckage. Human ships were damaged, some critically. But they had held. The Krovar Empire's military power was completely broken. The casualty reports came in slowly over the following days. 12,000 Earth Fleet personnel killed, 57 ships destroyed, hundreds more damaged. The names and faces of the dead filled memorial databases. Each loss hurt. Each empty bunk was a reminder of the war's cost. But they had accomplished their mission. General Throck was in custody. The Krovar Empire would never threaten anyone again. The trial took place aboard a neutral space station 6 months later. Representatives from 40 species attended. General Throck and 47 other Krovar officers faced charges of genocide and war crimes. Evidence was presented meticulously. Survivors testified about the atrocities they witnessed. The footage from New Haven played for the assembled delegates. The verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts. The sentence was not execution but something the Krovar considered worse: life imprisonment on a barren moon, where they would spend their remaining years building a monument to every being who died in their wars of conquest. The memorial would take centuries to complete. Every name would be carved by their own hands. The Krovar officers were led away in chains, their empire reduced to a cautionary tale. President Daniel Cross addressed the United Nations on Earth 3 months after the trial. He spoke of the cost of the war, the lives lost, the resources spent, the trauma that would take years to heal. He also spoke of what had been gained. Humanity had proven that they would defend their own. They had liberated the victims of Krovar oppression. They had shown the galaxy that Earth's compassion did not mean weakness. Other species watched Earth with new eyes. Some with fear. Some with respect. All with understanding. Humanity was not to be trifled with. They built colonies and traded, peacefully, but they possessed the capability and will to wage devastating war when necessary. New treaties were proposed, alliances formed. The galactic community restructured itself around the reality of human military power. Admiral Cole retired to a quiet home in Colorado. She spent her days writing memoirs and answering questions from military historians. Sometimes she woke from nightmares about the battle at Kravik Prime, seeing the faces of crew members who died under her command. But she also received letters from colonies across human space, thanking her for keeping them safe. The gratitude helped balance the grief. Captain Nina Scott returned to Earth and took a teaching position at the Intelligence Academy. Her deep cover operation had provided critical info.